The model and the database we built did two things for us. First, and I think most important, it allowed us to put a great deal of information in front of parents around the country. So, for example, anybody can now use our database online to look up a school near them and see what's likely to be in the air and to see what the issues associated with that might be. It also allowed us to draw some conclusions. For example, one thing people asked was, why focus on schools? Wouldn't this be a community issue? That's true, but we were also able to identify thousands of schools where the air around the schools is likely to be much worse than other places in the school district. We also weren't content to stop with, it's really frustrating, to stop with just this modeling. A model tells you only what's probable. So we partnered with Pat Breysse from Johns Hopkins University and Amir Sapkota from the University of Maryland, who designed a testing regimen for us, secured the equipment for us, and really held our hands through a monitoring process at more than 90 schools in more than 30 states. And they took our results and they told us what we had found. All we had to do was collect the samples, and we were able to draw a great deal on their expertise. One of the schools we visited was Midland, Pennsylvania. There's a video to go with that as well.
It's a nice place to be.
A lot of people are really proud of the town where it's at. Every town has its bad spots, but you know that's everywhere in the USA.
Midland is a town of about 3,000 people along the Ohio River, and it's long been known as a steel town. Part of the reason we decided to go there was that it was ranking pretty high among the schools that we modeled.
The approach used by USA Today was to take the modeling data and rank schools across the country in terms of what their health risk might be.
Part of the reason we decided to go out and do snapshot monitoring of air at some of these schools was because the government wasn't.
There has to be a thorough investigation beyond just the modeling approach.
We worked with Johns Hopkins University and the School of Public Health at the University of Maryland to come up with a way of gathering data from schools around the country. One of the things we did was to do as we call snapshot monitoring, where we might spend 5 days outside a school with various apparatus collecting samples of the air, then sending those samples to the lab to be analyzed.
But once we got the samples were collected on pieces of filter paper. So first we had to digest the filter paper. Then we had to dissolve the metals in concentrated acid. Once we had the metals that were dissolved in this concentrated acid solution, we could inject them into the ICP-MS, that's a fancy piece of analytical equipment that tells us how much metals are present.
I've lived in Midland for the last 4 or 5 years, but I grew up in the industry the next town down. I don't really have any concerns about the pollution.
In Midland and a host of other towns, it's not surprising that residents might not see problems or might think that this isn't related to industries in the areas. Part of what's so insidious about air pollution is that the problems that show up might not come for decades later.
One of the things I worry about as a pediatrician is that children are much more vulnerable, much more susceptible to toxic chemicals than adults.
They may be breathing things early on in their lives that don't manifest until 20, 30 years later.
The cancer rate's high. I've lost a couple handfuls of people with cancer.
You always have a concern about, what may be coming from that.
The Midland, Pennsylvania school, the air monitoring suggests there might be some concern there.
The child may seem to be okay. The child may be able to go to school, may be able to study, may be able to play sports, looks okay, but is actually going to be operating with less than his given potential.
There is pollutants, let's just say that much.
I don't believe there's anything in there. If they're hiding it, they're doing a real good job of hiding it.
The air monitoring indicated that we had high levels of airborne chromium there. Certain species of chromium are highly carcinogenic. The airborne chromium was consistent with the types of industries that we think are close. It's an industrial corridor with a steel mill, a power plant, a foundry close by. And the chromium measurements suggested that there's more follow-up that needs to be done to think about what that risk might be.
How do you know that a child is being exposed? And the answer to that question is, in many cases, you don't know. Because if the exposures are at relatively low levels, they may be causing damage in the child. They may be causing mutations in a child's cells that begin the pathway to cancer.
If I found out it was, if there was something dangerous going on there, I would definitely have to relocate my family.
If it is something going on, I would really want them to look into it.
So no parent should take these results and think that their children are at risk and they need to kind of stop sending their kids to school.
If a family realizes through reading your story or other reports that they live in a polluted area, they should bring this matter to the attention of their pediatrician, their family doctor, so that the doctor is also aware of it. And then the doctor may want to do appropriate tests.
Experts who have looked at what we did say that parents shouldn't be alarmed, but they should be concerned. They should start asking questions, both of their school district and of the companies that are located nearby. They should try to find out what's in the air. And the experts say that they can contact advocacy groups, they can contact state environmental agencies, they can contact their school officials, that these are questions that they ought to ask and answers they should get.
We've heard from hundreds of parents, people who are like Mary Pavetto in Portland, Oregon, who has found herself in charge of an ad hoc group of parents. They've collected 1,200 signatures to get a local factory to use the best air filtration technology as they're trying to get the EPA there to do monitoring. David, in his introduction, mentioned that the EPA has launched a $2.25 million program, and last week they reported on 15 schools in about 8 different states where they found high levels of a substance called acrolein. Now, acrolein used to be used as a chemical weapon in World War I. It now comes from burning things, and at these locations, it wasn't just that they found a little bit more. At every location, they found at least 100 times above what the government considers safe. I spoke with the principal at Spain Elementary in Detroit, and he had been there for 13 years, but this was the first time he had ever heard that the air outside his school was bad. And he had been sending asthmatic kids across the street to the Children's Hospital of Michigan over the course of his time there, but he said not until this monitoring started did he have any idea why. What we found with this was that the results from the EPA have been startlingly sound. But what we're getting from state regulators is quite a bit different. In Pennsylvania, for instance, the superintendent of the school district you saw, Midland, requested immediately that the state put a monitor on the roof. Now, we were there, and during the time we were there, the steel mill in the borough was operating, and we found chromium. During the 12 days that the state was monitoring there, the steel mill was idle, and they found no chromium, and they've stopped monitoring. Louisiana, one can argue, is even more pronounced. There is a school called Wyandotte Early Childhood Center, which is 6 blocks from the nation's second largest refinery. That's where 4-year-olds go, 120 of them. That school basically came up pretty high on our modeled list, and when the state went there to monitor, they were there for 1 day, for 4 hours, and took 1 air sample before declaring that the air outside this school met all known health and safety standards. Now, if that's enough, then I guess we did 24 times more than what the state of Louisiana did, and we weren't even satisfied that ours was more than illustrative. So the message to parents going forward is use the tools that this database provides to ask questions. Be vigilant. We care a lot about things like where our kids go to school relative to sex offenders or relative to drugs. We take a look through their bags of Halloween candy when they come home, but yet we don't ask the kinds of questions like what's in the air outside their schools and what can we do about it? And those are the kinds of questions that we hope parents will continue to ask. Thanks.